With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yoma Daf Zayin. We are in the middle of the machlokes between Rav Nachman and Rav Sheshes regarding the rule that we learn from Korban Pesach. When the Torah speaks about Pesach Sheni, the Torah says that ish ki yihi el tamei lo nefesh, then such a person may not bring Pesach Rishon and must bring Pesach Sheni. So learn Chazal that if it's ish, if it's a yachid, if it's individuals that became tamei, they have to be deferred. They can't bring Pesach Rishon, and therefore they have to bring Pesach Sheni. But if the entire community is tamei b'tumas meis, or if the entire community is tamei with a tumah that originated outside of their bodies, then they will bring Pesach Rishon. And as we learned in Masechtas Pesachim, we have a Gzeira Shava, from where we compare all the other kachim, that if they are similar to Pesach, meaning it's a Korban Sibur, that they are brought while there is tumah. Now, the machlokes Amoraim is whether we view this rule, and let's use the words that tumas hameis hutra b'tzibur. Hutra means it becomes completely permitted, and as we explained yesterday, and therefore we don't even have to make an effort of bringing someone that's tahar. And according to one version, even if you have in the Beis Av some kehanim that are tahirim, some that are tameim, you can have the tameim doing the avodim. Tumas completely mutar b'tzibur, or Rav Sheshes holds Tuma dechuya b'tzibur. In other words, when there isn't any other option, so then the importance of a Korban Sibur will override the problem of Tuma, but there is a problem of Tuma, which will always result in the importance of making some effort of bringing it b'tahara. Now there's another din, and that other din is called tzitz meratza. Tzitz meratza means that the tzitz affects acceptance. Now it's a more limited halacha and it's a broader halacha. On one hand, tzitz meratza doesn't only go to a Korban Sibur, even a Korban Yachid. If the Korban itself is tamei, after the fact, that's like the chuya. If it was already brought, then Hashem will find it acceptable nonetheless because of the tzitz. Whether Yachid, whether Tzibur. But the limitation of tzitz meratza isn't only that it's like after the fact, but tzitz meratza will only apply, like we mentioned, if the Korban is tamei, but not if the kohen is tamei. When we speak about tumah being chutra b'tzibur or the chuya b'tzibur, doesn't make a difference, right? The kohen can be tamei b'tumas meis, the roiv kohanim or roiv hakol, either chutra or at least the chuya, even though it's the person. Tzitz will never affect a ritzui if the kohen is tamei by a Korban Yachid. B'chlal won't be effective. But yes, if the problem is with the animal itself, and we'll learn details, whether it is with the basar, whether it is the dam, whether it is the chalev, then we're going to say tzitz is meratza. Now, what we will learn today is that when exactly is tzitz meratza? Is it only going to have that effect when the kohen gadol is wearing it? Or will tzitz meratza have its effect simply because there is the existence of a tzitz? Now, l'kula alma, as we'll see in the Gemara, if the tzitz is broken, then it won't affect any more acceptance. But if some holds that simply the existence of the tzitz in itself affects that Hashem accepts the Korban, even though the Korban itself was tamei. And ultimately, we're going to compare some halachas of tefillin that we all have the merit to wear, men, during weekdays, and the tzitz that the kohen gadol exclusively wore, they have certain similarities. Actually, we'll see that the tefillin has to a certain degree even more kedusha than the tzitz, simply because on the tzitz, Hashem's name is written once, right? Kodesh Lashem, La Yud Kei Vav Kei. And on the tefillin, how many times do we have Hashem's holy name, and much more? Chavra, let's start on Daf Zayin Amud Aleph. We left off second line from the top of the Amud. Again, we are focusing on the machlokes Rav Nachman, Tumas Meis Hutra b'tzibur, and Rav Sheshes holds Tumas Meis the Chuya b'tzibur. Amar Rav Sheshes Bino Amin Allah. What's my source? That it's only the Chuya. It's only overridden. Tuma still is an issue. Try to avoid it. The time we learned, if the kohen who is offering the minchas ha'omer, that's brought on the 16th of Nisan, discovers that v'nitmeis biyadai, that the korban itself, the barley itself, became tamei. So first thing is oimer, notify your chavedim, not the whole world. Notify your chavedim, and therefore, if there is an option of other barley that's not tamei, so umeviyin acheres tachtel, it's going to delay the avodah. So what? Bring it betara. But listen to this: ve'im ein sham Elohi. If the only barley available to be brought today is the one that you have, God forbid there was a drought, and this oimer became tamei, so then oimrim loy, we tell this kohen, have a pikeyach ushtoik, be smart and therefore be silent. What should be silent? So first of all, minimally tuma duchuya. So if there's no other option, this is a korban sibur, right? So you can bring it betuma. Now, why should it be quiet? Because a observer won't know that this is a korban sibur. An observer will see a kohen is bringing a korban mincha, and if everyone is going to know that that which he is offering is tamei, what will observer think? An observer might think that you can bring a korban even though there's tuma. He won't know the nuance. That's a korban sibur. So obviously, tell your chavedim to try to bring it betara. But if there's no other option, then don't let it be known. Faked shtoik. So what's the biggest raya? That if there is an option of getting other barley that's tahir, then you should bring tahirim. If tuma would be mamish hutra betzibur, then why would he even have to notify his chavedim? That's the raya of Rab Sheshes. So Ketanamiyas, Oimer, initially notify the people around you in order umiviyam acheres tachtel, is the raya again that it's only the chuya and it's not completely permitted. So this is a great proof that Rab Sheshes, but this can mamish refute Rav Nachman. So Rav Nachman says, I'm going to defend my position. Amar Rav Nachman, here's a chayin. Moidina, I also am moide, that what? That heicha de ikashirayim la'achila, that when there's a korban sibur, and guys, we spoke it out yesterday, we learned this properly in Psachim, even according to Rav Nachman, even if tuma is hutra betzibur, hutra only to offer on the mizbeach, the part that goes to God on the altar. But the other part of a korban, if there is a part that is meant to be consumed, it will not be consumed, even if it's a korban sibur, and the kaihanim are the ones doing the consumption, it may not be done if there's tuma. Now, a korban oimer, not all of it is burnt on the altar. Unlike, let's say, a korban mincha of every kohen, that all of it is burnt. No, an oimer, a kemitza is burnt on the mizbeach, and the rest of it, like many other korbanis that are in the category of kachik kachim, are eaten by the kaihanim. If there is tuma, the kaihanim will not be allowed to eat it. Oh, so Rav Nachman says tuma is chutra betzibur, but when there is a korban that the part that should be eaten by the kahanim will not be allowed to be eaten by kahanim, because that's the rule, tuma hutra only for the part l'Hashem. So even Rav Nachman is made the lechatchila, go and try to find a oimer that's a tohar. Gavaldik. Problem is, Meisvei, we're going to have another Braisa, and where Rav Nachman L'chu'ura won't be able to get out of this challenge by saying, because there's Shirayim La'achila. Now listen, the Braisa doesn't specify what type of korban it is referring to. But let's read the words. It says, Hoya Makrav Minchas Parim Ve'elam Ukavasim. If a kohen is offering a mincha, right, of parim elam ukavasim, what a mincha of parim. So just to know that whether it's oila, whether it's shlamim, guys, remember the rules. Whether it's a korban yachid, whether it's a korban sibur, these oila and shlamim comes along with nesachim, which means aside of the animal, you have to pour a certain amount of wine, and it comes together with flour and oil, and it's mixed together and it's burnt on the altar. Now nesachim that come with these karbanos don't have shirayim, because the main korban is the meat. Hashem, so to say, wants us to add on the flour, oil, and the wine. All of that is burnt on the altar. There's no shirayim here. L'chayra. So if you have minchas parim ve'elam ukavasim, and the same braisa, and the braisa is not speaking about the meat. We're speaking about the flour. Vinit meis biyadai. It's mamish the same lashon. So first of all, just the concept that certain things have to be shared, but not everything has to be shared with the whole world. You tell the people around, Oimer, the kohen should not hide it, even though the kohen knows that tuma d'chuya b'tzibur. Something became tummy, tell the people around you. And what do you do? Meviyim acheres tachtan. If there's more flour that's not tummy, then they would bring it. The one that became tummy would be burnt. with all the pratim that we learned, as all psuli hamikdashim. And what was the rule that we learned? That we learned this in Shkolim, that psuli hamikdashim that are in the category of kachim, they are burnt in the azara. But ve'im ein sham Elohi, same thing. They tell the kohen, listen here, heavy pikeach ushtoik. Don't publicize it. Now we got a problem. Because my love, are we not speaking about parim elam mekuvasim that are all in the category of the chag of karbanos tzibur? And indeed, if it's a communal carbon, according to Rav Nachman, Tuma should be hutra b'tzibur. So why does he even have to replace it if there is an option of replacing it? It's hutra b'tzibur. And all of this is especially according to the second Ikad Amri, just like he said before, that if you have Kahanim, Tahirim, and Tamim in the same base Av, don't even bother getting the Tahirim. Doesn't matter, it's completely mutar. Why would you have to replace it? And here you can't answer because the Sharayim cannot be eaten. If the Braisa is specifically speaking about Parim, Elam, and Kavasim, the Chag, so then the Nesachim that comes with a carbon doesn't have a kemitza taken off it, all of it is burned. This is takakashes, Nachman. I'll have to explain that the cases of the Braisa, the Parim and the Elam and the Kavasim, I'll explain each one to you. That the case of Parim is referring only about the Par Avodah Zarah. And as we will learn in Masechta Hoirius, that if Hoiru Bezdin, they gave her a erroneous ruling regarding a detail about Avodah Zarah. They didn't make a mistake by saying you can serve Avodah Zarah, but there was a certain specific detail that they paskined is allowed when it's not. And not only did they paskin, but the majority of the kahal actually did whatever they said you could do. Now normally if I make a mistake, I have to bring a chatos. But here, even though individuals made mistakes, but it was based on the erroneous ruling of the Beis Din. So there's a din that the Beis Din has to bring karbanos. By Avodah Zarah, one of them is a par. Now, this is, my friends, this is a communal carbon. But now let's learn a detail about Tuma Hutra B'tzibur or Tuma Dechuya B'tzibur. When do we say Tuma Hutra or Tuma Dechuya? Only if it's a carbon that has to be brought at a specific time. It's a carbon Sibur that has to come on Yontif. Right? Or a carbon Pesach, it has to come on the 14th. But if there is a communal carbon, but doesn't have to be brought today, it can be brought anytime. Hoiru Beis Din, the Beis Din has to bring a par. So no longer do we use the whole concept of Tuma Tchuya or Tuma Hutra, but there's something else. Now we're going to introduce Tzitz Meratza. What does come into play is another rule. That if you have the tzitz, we'll see details more in today's daf, the tzitz itself affects that Hashem will accept the carbon even though it was brought b'tumah. But my friend, that's only like a duchuya. Tzitz meratza is not like a hutra. So now it fits. So it's par avodah zarah. So you are relying on a tzitz, and it's never a lachatchila. That's why the Braisa says, if there is an option to replace the mincha, replace it. Afal gav the tziburu. But since kivin the loy kaviyah leizman, so yes, mehadirinon gavaldik. We try to bring the mincha betara. Now, if you don't have shtoik, because you have tzitz manatza, pseder, but that's not a lachatchila. Elim, the case of Elim, and we mentioned this yesterday, that even though the Gemara's approach was that all of the avodah of Yom Kippur is considered communal avodah, yes, but no, there is one exception. Really, we spoke this out yesterday. There are two exceptions. There is the chatos, right, and the oila. There's the pot and the ayol of the kohen gadol that is out of his pocket. But since the chatos of the kohen gadol is a step that's needed, only after which you can bring the chatos of the community, we consider the personal chatos of the kohen gadol also in the category of tzibur. And whenever there's tuma hutra or dechuya, it will go on the chatos of the personal chatos of the kohen gadol as well. But the ayol that the kohen gadol has to bring is considered personal. Now, it doesn't justify, like we learned yesterday, why do you have to do prisha? It's anyways a communal. We're not going to justify doing a prisha for 7 days only because of the ayol. However, when he brings the ayol, if there is tuma, that's called a carbon yachid. Elim be'elu shel Aaron, the aflagav tkviyah leizman, kiven the yachid hi mahadrinon. And here again, it's a carbon yachid. So why does the Braisa say, and if there is no option, they bring it and they tell them, be quiet, don't tell the whole world it was tamei? Because tzitz meratza, like we mentioned, tzitz meratza, as long as the tumah is not on the person, as long as it's only on the carbon, tzitz meratza, bein b'tzibur, even b'yachid. But it's never ala chatchila. And the kevasim is weiter, kevasim is bekevas abayim ha'omer. So don't tell me, like we mentioned in the Havamina, that the nesachim of an oila and a shlamim are fully burnt. Well, that's a good rule with an exception. An exception will be that the korban mincha is not fully burnt. There's a kaimetz, and then there's the shirayim. And the keves is specifically the keves that comes with the oimer, and therefore the nesachim refers here to the oimer, and that's why, since the ikar shirayim lachila, lechatchila try to replace it with barley, that's the hoidim. Gavaldik. Meisvei, the next attempted question on Rav Nachman that holds Tuma Hutra B'tzibur. It says in a Braisa, Dam Shenitma. And even though the dam of a carbon became tummy, if nevertheless Uzerakai, it was thrown, says the Braisa, if B'shoigeg, the coin that did Avoid of Zerika did not know at that time, then Hurtza, then the carbon, affected what it needed to affect. The owner became atoned. But B'mezid, if he knew, then loy hurtza. Now let's make something clear. Like Rashi reminds us, we had the Sugya Pesachim, that really tzitz is meratza. You know what? Tzitz is meratza even if it avoida was done b'mezid. Nor was then the Chachamim gave a knas, and he says we don't. Tzitz meratza is like a b'diavad. If you discovered later, oy gavalt, there was tuma, it's fine. But no one wanted for you to rely on the tzitz meratza to bring, to here in our case, the damas tamei. Don't do it. So then Rashi adds another nuance. If the carbon really biblically affected what it needed to affect, then even though the Chachamim said b'meitzed loy hurtza, it doesn't mean that the owner will bring another carbon. Because let's say it's a carbon chatos. If I'm not obligated to bring a carbon chatos, I'm not allowed to bring a carbon chatos. It's chulin ba'azara. So Rashi explains that b'meitzed loy hurtza only means that they don't allow the owners to eat the meat, or they don't allow the kahanim to eat the meat, and you have to have a ibur tzura with all the pratim. But even the loy hurtza really means that the avoida because tzitz meratza. Now, so what do we see over here, Nachamol? Here's the thing, if you have the other rule of tuma hutra betzibur, if tuma hutra betzibur, then even b'mezid, you don't need a tzitz b'chlal. This whole idea of being meratze, only b'shoigig, not b'mezid, that's clearly, if tuma would be hutra betzibur, then when dam becomes tamei lechatchila, bring it. And the Gemara says, Eina chanami. Who told you the Braisa is speaking about a carbon sibur? Rav Nachman is going to have to limit. He's going to say, Kitanya hi, only the yachid. Another attempted question. Tashma we learned in a Braisa, Alma hatzitz meratze, both al the dam, meaning if the dam became tamei, or if the meat that has to be eaten became tamei, or if the chelev that is burnt on the altar became tamei. Shenitma, bein b'shoigig, bein b'mezid, the Rishonim touch the word b'mezid. Whether these parts became tamei b'shoigig, or whether even if that part became tamei b'mezid, because we just learned in the previous brisa that don't bring it b'mezid. So the b'mezid here is speaking about how it became tamei, bein b'oinus, bein b'ratzin, bein b'yachad, bein b'tzibur. The tzitz is meratza. Now again, v'is al kadaytach tuma, that tuma is heted hi b'tzibur. So similar kasha. Why do we need to rely on this tzitz meratza if it's mamish chutra? So again, Amalach Rav Nachman, indeed, ki ketane hatzitz meratza only adi achid, or v'iba yiseimon afilo tema b'tzibur, like we just learned above when it came to the para avodah zara, that bahanoch the loy kivia lazman, any carbon sivur, if it doesn't have to be brought out at a specific time, whether it's dechuya or hitra, you don't apply that. And for that, you need to go to the tzitz meratza with its advantages, that it's even for a carbon yachid, and with its limitations, that it's only meratza if the tuma is in the meat, in the carbon. It's never meratza if the tuma is in the person. Meisvei, now we're going to start focusing more on this din of tzitz meratza. It says in a braisa.
Just a quick question.
Sure.
I'm just trying to think about the technical aspects of the tumah moving from because we said that this the discussion of Rav Nachman is only if the tumah is in the kayin, right?
No, both. No. Yeah, correct. The din of by a korban tzibur, whether it's hutra or whether it's dechuya, it's a broader. It doesn't matter. We learned that Mishnah is in Pesachim. Whether Reif Kahanim are tamei, remember, whether the meat.
It only applies to korban tzibur.
Correct. Korban tzibur shekiviyah lehem zman. Correct.
So at a time, according to Rav Nachman, if there's a claim that's tamei, when you get the amri, and I'm a private person, I'm bringing a korban, that claim can't offer my korban.
Correct.
But he could do the korban tamei.
Correct. He can do a korban tzibur. Correct. He can bring the tamid of the morning. Correct. Yes. However, but they won't be eaten. Anyways, tamid is never eaten anyways. But tuma hutra b'tzibur doesn't allow you to eat it. That's the whole thing that we're learning. Tzitz meratza means biblically you can eat the basar. Then the Chachamim says if you know that don't do it lachatchila. Okay, let's go weiter. Meisvei, we learned in a Braisa. Now more about tzitz meratza, guys. In Parshas Tetzaveh, not in the part that we were learning just recently about the Shiva Simei Hamaluyim, but the first half, so to say, of Parshas Tetzaveh is Hashem's commandment to Moshe of how to make the big day kahuna. So this is the pasuk about one of the Shmoyne Begadim, which is the tzitz, which is a plate of gold that was placed on the forehead of the kohen, and it says that v'nasa Aharon es havayna kachim. This is written specifically regarding the tzitz, that Aaron will bear the sin. Bearing the sin means that even if something was not done in a lachatchila way, somehow Aaron is going to help whatever you did be effective anyways. Tzitz meratz. Now, the Braisa wants to clarify that the Torah doesn't say that the existence or the wearing of the tzitz somehow helps us carry a sin. It doesn't say what sin. So the Braisa clarifies. It can't go im oven pigul if the korban became pigul, which means that the kohen had a machshava during any one of the 4 steps of the avodah, which is shchita, kabbalah, hilacha, and zrika, that he will do either that or another of the 4 steps, or the eating. Chutz lizman, not so negay all the details right now, but if the korban became pigul, so is the fact that there is an existence of a tzitz, will it allow that korban to be brought? Or if someone is going to eat that animal later, will he not be chayiv kadosh? He will be, because it says in the Torah, lo yei ratza, it will not be accepted. That's actually to make it clear that there's no scenario where pigul will affect its acceptance. If it's avoy noisa means not that you had a machshava chutz lizman, but if some part of the korban was actually delayed to have been brought, to have been offered, and it's beyond its prescribed time. So the dam becomes nicer once it's shkia. The meat becomes nicer. Well, depends. If the animal has to be eaten one day and one night, then in the following morning. If it's a shlomim that could be eaten for 2 days and one night, then it's in the second night. But if you're going to tell me that if there was nicer, it will, at the end of the day, if a person, let's say, ate it, it's going to be fine? No. Pasuk and Sav, lo yei chashev, it will not be considered. Not, in other words, even after the fact, it's never going to be valid. Daf Zayin Amid Beis. So what's left? So the Torah didn't explicitly write on what or for what sin is the tzitz meratza. So we clarify. Ha'eina noise elam avoin tuma. It will be meratza on avoin tuma. Now, why will we say tzitz meratza? So the Braisa gives a logic. Because since we find, listen to the words, shehutra michlala b'tzibur. Since we find that anyways when it comes to tuma, not by tzitz, when it comes to a tzibur, that hutra, so we find that Hashem made exceptions for tuma. And since Hashem did not specify for what is the tzitz maratze, it's not only that we are deducing that there's nothing left other than tuma. It's more than that. It makes sense it should go for tuma. Because once you find that Hashem made exceptions, in one scenario it makes sense that tzitz is maratze in other scenarios as well. Now what word does the Braisa use? Not she'dechuya michlala b'tzibur. The word is hutra. That's a problem. So here we already have the words hutra So who's this kasha on? On Absheshes. How can you say it's the Chuyah? So the kasha let Absheshes. Says Absheshes, yes, you're right. This Tana holds, and that will be the base of Rav Nachman, that Tuma Hutra. But really, the Chuyah Hutra did not begin with us Amayroim. It did not begin with us Amayroim. It's a Machlokes Tanoim Tanoyehi. The Tanya, now it's not an explicit Machlokes Tanoim. We're going to see the amazing link that the Gemara is going to make. The Tanya. And we spoke this out in the intro. Tzitz bein sheyeshnoi al mitzchay bein she'enoi al mitzchay. The tzitz, whether it's on the forehead of the Kohen Gadol, whether it's not on the forehead of the Kohen Gadol, it will always be meratza. I know we're learning quick, but chevra, it's amazing. Says Rashi, what's pshat meratza? For what? For what? So we kept on speaking about that if the korban was brought, if the dam was sprinkled betuma. Rashi holds tzitz meratza. It's about when the tuma came about. It's not about when the korban was offered. You need to have a tzitz. You need to have a tzitz for when the tuma affected the korban or the dam or the chaylev, etc. That is where we need to have tzitz meratza. Which means, according to Rashi, if when the korban became tamei, there wasn't a tzitz, or the tzitz was broken. Even according to this Tanach Rab Shimon, you don't have to be wearing it, but it has to be intact. If during the time of the tumah there wasn't a tzitz, tzitz won't be meratz. According to the other Rishonim, tzitz meratz is the way people always think. Tzitz meratz is when that part of the korban that was tamei was brought. Was there a tzitz or was there not a tzitz? Or was the kohen wearing the tzitz or was he not wearing the tzitz? So it's either about the time of the avoida, but l'Rashi it's about the time of the tumah. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, no, tzitz meratzeh is only if it's on the forehead of the kohen gadol. Oideya al mitzchay, then meratzeh. Ein oideya al mitzchay, ein meratzeh. Now continues the Braisa, Omar loy Rab Shimon to Rabbi Yehuda. How can you, Rabbi Yehuda, say that a tzitz only affects acceptance while the kohen gadol is wearing it? We know that on Yom Kippur, during a substantial amount of the avodah, the kohen gadol doesn't wear the shmonim begadim. He only wears 4 of the 8 garments. The 4 garments that only are made out of linen that have no gold, which means he does not wear the tzitz. He says, kohen gadol b'yom kippurim yerchiach. She'ein oideyo al mitzchay, when he's performing the avodah, and yet it's meratzah. Now let's give you an example, right? That the kohen gadol can only enter the kodesh hakodesh after he brought the chatos and the soir, his chatos and soir, and when he shechts the chatos and the soir, he's already wearing only the big day loven. Now, what were to happen if there's tumah there? You need to have tzitz meratza. It will be advantageous to have tzitz meratza, not that you need it. And l'chayra, we use the tzitz meratza. He wasn't wearing the tzitz. Is the charaya that tzitz is meratza? And again, according to Rashi, it's about when it became tamei. Fine. So when you shechted an animal, when the animal is living, an animal can never become tamei. From when can the animal become tamei? From when you shechted. The kohen gadol, from when he shechted his par, and when he shechted his ayol, he already was wearing the big day loven, as we'll learn many details soon in Yoma, because those bloods were actually brought into the kodesh kacha. So that's a great raya. So Amalei Rabbi Yehuda, no, Hanach l'kohen gadol b'yom kippurim. Don't even bring that raya. You know why? Because shetuma hutra loy b'tzibur. On Yom Kippur, like we mentioned, it's considered a communal avodah. So we don't need to have tzitz meratza because we have shetuma hutra b'tzibur. So now all this is Rab Sheshes. So he's saying that Rabbi Yehuda is good. Rabbi Yehuda is saying, how can you bring a raya from the kohen gadol on Yom Kippur when you don't need to have the tzitz? But Rab Shimon does bring a raya. Why does he bring a raya? Says the Gemara, says Rab Sheshes Mechlal, that Rab Shimon Taka holds that tumas only the chuya b'tzibur. And let's read inside the words of Tosfos. Tosfos, the last Tosfos in the Amud. Let's go 5 lines before the bottom of the Amud. He has gewaldige words. V'yashleimer dahachi ka'amar Rab Shimon. Kohen gadol b'yom kippurim yerchiach. Look inside Tosfos. De'i nitma ha'karban b'yadei. If the carbon will become tamei, afilu yesh acheres tohoira. Even if there is another carbon, Ein oimer loy, we know that on Yom Kippur we will not even tell him, even if there is an option, havei acheres tachteha, bring another one. We don't do that. Now, why wouldn't we do that? Va'al karchach haynu mishum, it must be according to Rab Shimon, because the afilu ein oideya al mitzroy, it's meratzah. But didn't we say that sitz meratzah is only a b'di'evid? So Tosfos says beautiful, that when you have both a korban sibur, and Rab Shimon clearly holds only the chuya, and you have tzitz meratzah, you need to have both, then it becomes a lechatchila. Because v'kivan the ikat tarte, rid tzui tzitz, and v'korban sibur, le'mais achrit. Now, the ein oideo al mitzchoy, ein oy meratzah, that's the Raya of Rab Shimon. And he doesn't wear it on his forehead during many parts of the avodah of Yom Kippur, then we would at least tell him, bring another one. Why? Why would we tell him bring another one? Because if you are only relying on Tumah of Tzibur, then we only hold the Chuya. Since Tumah is only the Chuya but Tzibur, then Lechatchila bring another one. Beautiful. So the way we understand the back and forth between Rabbi Yehuda and Rab Shimon is really dependent on whether you subscribe to the Chuya and Hutra. Rab Sheshes proves that Rab Shimon holds the Chuya, so Rab Sheshes can rely on Rab Shimon by your Chuy. And Rab Nachman, even in this Braisa, will rely b'shittas Rabbi Yehuda that holds that it's Hutra. Okay, so now what do we have? We have Machlokes Amoraim, we have a Machlokes Tanoim. Now that we're speaking about the tzitz, let's chaparein and learn more details about the tzitz. So we already had a Machlokes. Does the Kohen Gadol have to be wearing it, or does it have to just exist? And what the Gemara wants to clarify, we already spoke it out. Amar Abaye, listen here. B'shenishbar hatzitz, if God forbid the tzitz is broken, the kula amal loy pliged the meratza. It's not going to be effective at all. Ki pligi, what is the argument between Rab Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda? The tali bisikta, when it's hanging on a peg, it's intact but hanging on a peg. It's not on the forehead of the Kohen Gadol. First wide line. Rabbi Yehuda holds, since the pasuk says this is all based on the psukim in Tetzaveh, the pasuk writes, this is Pedek Chav Ches in Shemais. Pasuk Lamed Ches. The pasuk writes that v'hoya al meitzach aharon, it's going to be on the forehead of Aaron, v'nosa Aaron esamein hakachim, and he therefore will bear the sin of the kachim. So the Torah writes on the forehead, and it will bear. Clearly, it has to be on the forehead for there to be v'nosa. Rabbi Shimon holds that saying pasuk, the seif of pasuk lamed ches, writes v'hoya al mitzchoy tamid l'ratzin lahem lifnei Hashem. So tamid l'ratzin lifnei Hashem. It always will be nicer. Now the question is, second line, my tamid. What are you telling me that he always has to wear it? Tamid al mitzchoy. Can't be. Mi mishkachas la. Mi leboy lemei lebeis hakisei. Does the Kohen Gadol not have to go to the bathroom? And obviously cannot go with the tzitz. Miloi boyel menam, does he never sleep? He cannot sleep with the tzitz. Elot means tamid meratzahu. Tamid means even though he's not wearing it, it's meratzah. So each one is medayik from another part of the pasuk. Rabbi Yehuda is medayik from the juxtaposition of al meitzach v'nasa, and Rab Shimon is medayik from the word tamid. And now the Gemara is going to explain what each Tana will do with the other persons, with the other Tana's Raya. Rabbi Yehuda nami yoksiv tamid. So he says, no, ahu tamid. Tamid doesn't mean that it's always meratzah. It means that while the Kohen Gadol is wearing it, that he always has to be mindful that he is wearing it. And keder Rabba bar Rafuna, the Amar Rabba bar Rafuna, chayiv adam lamashmesh b'tefillah b'chol shah v'shah, that while we wear the tefillin, this is even us nowadays that we really limit the time that we wear the tefillin, you have to every now and then touch your tefillin. And that's the minig that we have by certain psukim. We touch the tefillin shal yad. The Rebbe used to touch the yad. He didn't kiss it. The Rebbe would touch the yad. The Rebbe then would touch the roish. The Rebbe then would put the index finger and the ring finger on his eyes, and then he would kiss. Hand, head, eyes, that's what the Rebbe did. But why do we do that? We do that from the tzitz. Daf ches, that ma tzitz she'ein boy elas kara achas. Can you imagine? Tefillin is more chamer than the tzitz. Amar Torah al mitzchoy tamid. And here, what does tamid mean? That's the whole word. Tamid means is that while you are wearing it, don't forget that you're wearing it. So tefillin sheyesh boy askaris har balachas kama v'kama. Beautiful. Now let's go to Rab Shimon. Rab Shimon holds that it's meratzah taka tamid. Tamid meratzah. even if you're not wearing it. The pasuk begins al meitzach v'nasa. V'haksiv al mitzchay v'nasa answers the Gemara explaining Rab Shimon hahu l'kvayalei makam hoda'asa al mitzchay v'nasa, simply to tell you the location where he would wear it. And you know where that would be? That would be on the actual forehead. Unlike the tefillin, even though the Torah writes between your eyes, but we know that in between your eyes means on the place where your hair grows. Which means that even the lowest part of the tefillin should not go lower from your original hairline. The word original is important because some people, especially smart people, lose a little bit of their hair and then it recedes. And the Rebbe said many times the Rebbe would wear his tefillin what appeared a little bit low. The Rebbe said that when he had hair, the Rebbe's hairline, he said it in public a few times because it shouldn't look like you're wearing it too low. So, but where do you wear the tzitz? The tzitz is taka on your forehead. Actually, according to those who held that the Kohen Gadol also wore the tefillin while he wore the tzitz, it wasn't a problem. Because he would wear the tzitz on the forehead, and the tefillin would be above it, and then above the tefillin would be the hat of the Kohen Gadol. That was the whole sugya that we learned in Menachas, that yesh v'makam al roish l'niach, 2 pairs of tefillin v'chuli. Okay. Now, v'Rabbi Yehuda l'kvayilei makam in alei, taka. How would you know where to wear it? Guys, look at the pasuk. The pasuk writes twice mitzchay. Oh, he knows it because it's superfluous. There's a second al mitzchay. Oh, so the problem is that Rab Shimon Nami, if all Rab Shimon wants to know where to wear it, the pasuk already writes twice al mitzchay. So the Gemara goes back einachanami elo al mitzchay v'nasa may avidlei. So here's Gavaldik. So our malach, that like what Abaya began, that even according to Rab Shimon, that holds that the tzitz affects ritzoi even when you are not wearing it, but it has to be wholesome. It may not be broken. It has to be ro'ui lemeitzach. It has to be fit for wearing. Only then is it naratza, even though he's not wearing it. But if it's not even fit for wearing, then ain't naratza. In other words, fears the Gemara la fuke nishbarat tzitz the maratz. Now, Uli Rabbi Yehuda, how does he know that if nishbar hatzitz? Now, guys, don't forget that Rabbi Yehuda holds that it has to be on his forehead. Fine, but what happens if it's on his forehead, but it's broken? Broken can mean, we learned chochitas, there's different strings that connect the tzitz from the sides, from the top. Has to be completely wholesome. Nafgalei, because the Torah did not have to say mitzchoy, his forehead, the Torah could have written just forehead. His forehead, mimeitzach mitzchoy, and Rab Shimon, meitzach mitzchoy, loy mashmalei. So that's where we're leaving off right now. So we have a machlokes, whether tumah hutra or tumah d'chuya, and that is clearly connected to the underlying machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and Rab Shimon, or the raya of Rab Shimon, that the Kohen Gadol needs tzitz maratza, the way we explained in Tosfos. Because even when you say Tuma, the Chuya B'tzibur, if you have both the Chuya and Tzitz Maratza, then it becomes a Lechatchila. And indeed, the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur, even if there was a Tuma, even if there was an option, they wouldn't tell him, let's get the option that started. He would continue to do the Avodah, God willing, to be continued.